Hello and welcome, She Nodes. This series is titled The Novice Guide to Becoming a Rocketpool Node Validator. Today, we are going to learn more about Wagyu Keygen, why it was built, how it works, best practices, and safety measures. So today, to walk us through this, I have an extra special guest with me, Remy from Wagyu Key. Roy is a software developer, contributor to the eStaker community, and also the developer of Wagyu Keygen. Roy, I just want to say thank you for being here today, giving me your time. To start things off, tell me something about yourself that most people don't know.
Hey, thanks for inviting me here. First of all, my name is Remy. I know
Oh,
this is
okay.
confusing for many people, but that's
Uh,
totally fine. Roy is a common first name for English-speaking people, but I'm French. I'm French Canadian,
okay.
so probably that's one of the things most people don't know about me. I live in Canada. I live in Quebec, and I try to improve the Ethereum ecosystem the best way I can.
All right, that's awesome. Well, thank you. Well, that's very interesting, Remy. So very well. I'll call you Remy. Well, let's dive into the topic at hand, which is what is Wagyu Key and why should someone use it?
So Wagyu Keygen is a simple wrapper around the staking deposit CLI, which is
Mhm.
a tool to generate your validator keys. One of the issues with new user is that the original tool, the staking deposit CLI, was only possible to be used on the CLI, the command line interface,
Mhm.
and a lot of people are not familiar with that interface. It's usually like a black screen where you have to type text and you have to type commands with your keyboard, which is unfamiliar with the latest generations of people which were born with Windows and the graphical user interface that everyone knows about.
Yeah.
So what we decided was to simply build a simple UI on top of that tool and to expose the main feature of that tool through that UI.
So I'm a beginner, so I appreciate that. I recently used Wagyu Key, and I'm trying to do the least amount of command line as I can. Can you tell me kind of the security and efficiency, and briefly explain how Wagyu Key works on how you generate the secure keys?
So there's a few steps you have to go through. The initial one is either to generate a new mnemonic or a seed recovery phrase,
Mhm.
or to use an existing one if you have one. And so the Wagyu Keygen app will guide you through all of these steps. And so initially you have to decide if you want to create a new seed recovery phrase or a new mnemonic, and then you will be guided through all the different options that you can use with the tool, like how many keys you want to generate, if you want to bake in a withdrawal address right away, and then the password that you want to use for your key store file. So in the end, what you will get is a few key store files, one for each of the keys that you decided to generate, and then a deposit file that you'll be able to use through the Launchpad website mostly.
I see. So is how does Wagyu Key compare to maybe other key generator tools in Ethereum 2.0 ecosystem? What sets it apart?
That's a good question. I believe Wagyu Keygen is one of the only one that has a graphical user interface, so that's the main point of it.
That's what I was wondering.
And then the other ones that I know of are the staking deposit CLI, which is the one that you can use from the command line interface, and the other one is FDU, which is another great CLI tool. Unfortunately, there's no graphical user interface on top of it, so you have to type various commands on the command line.
Got it. It's that graphical user interface that sets you apart from your
Pretty
other
much, yeah.
competitors. Okay. What specific security features does Wagyu Key incorporate to protect the use of the validator keys?
There's not very much there. We have some tips and recommendation.
Mhm.
Whenever you want to use Wagyu Keygen, we strongly recommend that you do so on an offline machine. The main reason there is that online machines, especially the ones that you daily use, might be infected with some malware, and malicious actors could potentially get a hold of your mnemonic, and if they do, they could do a lot of nasty things with them. Um, One of the nasty thing that they could do with having access to your mnemonic is slashing your validator. So you don't want to share that value with anyone else. You want to keep that value private.
Mhm.
And the other thing that they could do, if you don't have a withdrawal address right away baked in with your validator key, which is probably not something that the Rocketpool community has to deal with these days, because I believe you are required to use a specific address. But if you were to do a solo staking setup, you might be able to not input a withdrawal address, and if a malicious actor has access to your mnemonic, he could decide to use his own withdrawal address, and then you would lose all the balance on your validator right away. So the main reason to perform this operation, the key creation part offline, is to prevent any malicious actor from obtaining the mnemonic. So that's one of the feature that it's not a feature, but it's a strong recommendation that we do. We try to clear the clipboard at the end. And so if you copied the mnemonic somewhere, the clipboard will be cleared. But besides that, I don't believe we have any strong security feature.
Are there any maybe specific case scenarios where Keygen would be suited, and where you might kind of face some challenges as far as, have you heard of like some common problems in the support that you've noticed?
We've had various builds not running like on old machines. One of the issues that we had recently was users on like old version of Windows, like Windows 7.
Mhm.
So if you're still using Windows 7, we don't support you, unfortunately. And that's also the case for Microsoft. Microsoft stopped supporting Windows 7 a few years ago. And so
Mhm.
if you're on Windows 7, you should try to migrate to a newer version of your operating system. If you have a very old machine, it might be troublesome because of the resources that are needed for the new operating system. But maybe you might want to try some of the low resources Linux operating system that could work for you in that case.
Okay, got it. So make sure that your operating system and your software is up to date, and that's usually the cause of most of the issues.
Yeah.
Is there any common misconceptions or mistakes that new users may have problems with and when they're generating their validator keys?
That's a good question. I don't believe there's any great issues with like the generating your validator key flow. So that
Mhm.
flow is pretty straightforward. We have another flow for validator who need to add a withdrawal address. So there's this process called the BLS to execution change that will enable you to add a withdrawal address to your validator if you don't have one currently. And this process is a little more complex. It's supported with the Wagyu Keygen, but you have to enter a lot of different data that can be hard to find. So the first issue is finding that data. You can find it on various websites like Beacon Chain, for instance. But the other issue is that some user um, did not store their mnemonic properly, or are having issues finding it again or finding the right mnemonic, especially if you have a lot of different seeds.
Mhm.
If you have a lot of different wallets, you might mix them up or like don't know where you start them. So if you lost the mnemonic, or like if you use the wrong one, the Wagyu software will give you an error during this BLS2 execution change process where you're trying to add a withdrawal address. And so those are the main issues where some people get confused, but can be resolved if you just find them the right mnemonic.
Got it. So security best practices, as far as when you're generating your keys, what do you recommend? Do you recommend, a separate computer? Do you recommend a USB? Obviously disconnecting from the internet. Could you walk us through that process of best practice?
So that's a good question. Like I initially mentioned, running this on an offline machine. And
Mhm.
so what you want to keep in mind is how a potential malware or malicious actor could potentially get a hold of your mnemonic, right? And
Mhm.
so the main way to do this is use a machine that never was online and never will be. When we say that, it's kind of hard to picture kind of that kind of machine because all of our machines nowadays are connected, right? And so
Mhm.
the main way to get there is often by installing an operating system on a USB drive and then booting from that USB drive on your machine. And so there's different guides and different processes to get there, but the gist of it is you boot on this operating system that only lives in memory. And so and you make sure that it's not connected, and once you get there, nothing is written on disk, nothing is connected to the internet, and so you can perform your validator key creation. um, Make sure to write down the mnemonic.
Mhm.
Ideally, you should try to write multiple copies, physical copies of your mnemonic, and then safeguard them from any fire, water, or theft risk. And so if you could, for instance, put different paper copies of your mnemonic in safes in different physical place, especially in case of fire. So you can always make sure that you can recover your funds or the value associated with that mnemonic. And so once you're done with performing the key creation step on your OS that lives in memory, all you have to do is shut down the OS, remove the USB key, and you can reuse that machine for whatever else you were using it initially.
Okay.
There's a few different operating systems that you could use. I like to recommend one which is called Tails. So if you search for Tails OS, that's a great secure and private operating system to perform these kinds of operation. But
Mhm.
you could use Ubuntu or various other operating system that can be installed on a USB drive and booted from your machine when you reboot, for instance.
Okay. So that's obviously the best way. What would you say would be the second best way? If someone's like, I'm not doing USB, what would you
Well,
say would be the second best way?
you could like use a laptop, for instance, and not connect it to the internet. The issue is if your laptop is already compromised, there's a way for malware to record whatever you're doing on
Mhm.
your computer down to the disk, and then eventually once your computer is connected back to the internet, um, potentially send that information back to a malicious actor who could use it, right? And
Mhm.
so that could be a second best way to do it, but I don't recommend it.
Okay. So definitely USB all the way. Have you seen this happen to somebody before?
I don't think I've seen any report of that happening, but like with most frauds, people are often ashamed of talking about it because like they got
That's fair.
fooled, and
Yeah.
then it's hard to have any kind of report or like statistics about that, right?
Right, right. And this is, not a small chunk of change of funds. So
Exactly.
it makes sense to have the best, highest security measures. Okay, so USB, download the USB. You're going to download your keys on the USB and then remove it. And the rest of the time they should be loaded. Is there multiple times that you're going to need to re-enter these keys?
So the result of generating your keys are like two files, like I mentioned a few
Mm-hmm.
minutes ago. You've got the key stored files and then the deposit file. So you'll need the
Mm-hmm.
deposit file somewhere to perform your deposit, and so that file has no keys in it. It only has like your validator public key, and so you
Mm-hmm.
can perform that deposit quite safely. There's a risk of leaking private information, the address of your validator, and so you should be concerned about that. The key store files are encrypted with your password, so as long as you don't leak the associated password, it's still a similar situation where you have the validator public key in them, and so private information can be leaked. But in terms of security, if you don't bundle the key store and the password on the same electronic medium, it should be somewhat safe there.
Okay. So really the only time that you'll need your validator keys, and after that, as far as the key stores, is when you exit the validator then, correct?
And so in order to perform a voluntary exit, the key stores can be used, but you can also use them mnemonic. So once you have the mnemonic, it's always possible to recover, and then you can recover the key store from the mnemonic.
Got it. Got it. So you have your USB. If you lose it, you still have your mnemonic that you can recover. What's the recovery process like with the Wagyu to recover your key stores?
So on the home screen of Wagyu, there's like two big buttons. The first one is to create a new mnemonic, and the second one is to reuse an existing mnemonic. And so all you have to do is click the second button, and you'll be able to input your mnemonic, and the process will be very similar.
All right. In the context of the Ethereum, the evolving landscape, how do you see the role of tools like Wagyu Keygen evolving, and what potential changes or opportunities do you think will come ahead?
That's a good question. I don't really know how the Ethereum protocol is going to evolve. It's always in a state of research and development, and so it's very hard to kind of figure out what's coming up. There's a few EIPs, these documents where people propose features and they get discussed, and you can kind of see what's coming up ahead. But in the end, developers and users decides what gets implemented, and they decide to run new versions of the software. And so it's kind of hard for us to see what's coming up ahead. In terms of like this whole validator key, I don't think there'll be any major updates in terms of like the whole process or like what's coming up. I feel like a bunch of these new protocols and tools coming up will be built on top of everything else, right? And so if you think about like Rocketpool did not use a special key or a special way of staking. They simply built on top of it with smart contracts and a liquid token, right? And so I believe the main way to extend this whole thing will be to build on top of existing stuff.
Awesome. I want to thank you for sharing your expertise and experiences with us today. It's been a pleasure having you. For our viewers, if you have any more questions or would like to explore Wagyu Keygen further, feel free to visit their website. You have a website, right?
We do. It's wagyu.gg.
Okay, I'll put the link at the bottom, or you can engage in the Ethereum staking community, ETHStaker, as well. Before we leave, though, I do have a surprise for you. Usually after every interview, I do like to play a game, and you get 60 seconds to answer as many questions as possible. And this is called the Crypto Lab Speed Scholar. Okay. And it's just general questions. Some are easy, some are hard. I think the most someone got was 6 or 9. So if you can get 9, you will be the Speed Scholar winner. Okay. And if you don't know it, then you can just say pass. Ready?
Right. I'm ready.
Go. Creator of Bitcoin.
Satoshi.
All other coins besides Bitcoin grouped together under this category.
Altcoins.
Yes. Online storage for cryptocurrency provided by an exchange or a third party.
I'll pass on that one.
Co-founder of Cardano.
I don't know.
A loan of sorts offered by a broker or an exchange during margin trading.
I'll pass.
A peer-to-peer system for cryptocurrency micropayments that's focused on low latency instant payments, typically low scalable, and can work across transactions for Bitcoin.
Lightning.
Yes. The password to your crypto holding.
I guess the mnemonic.
I'll give you that. Famous early crypto exchange that became insolvent due to hacks in 2014.
The DAO?
Nope. Disgraced founder of CEO of cryptocurrency exchange FTX.
FTB?
Say, who is it?
Sam Beckman.
Yes.
I don't know. I can't remember.
All right. Yes. I'll give you that one. We're out of time. Very good. Let's see how many you got. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Great job. Amazing.
Thanks.
Thank you for playing. And thank you for talking with me today. I really appreciate Wagyu Key as a beginner because command line can be very intimidating for a lot of people. So when you have this graphic interface that you're able to just click the button, it really is easy. So I appreciate that. And thank you. Thank you for being with me today. Good luck to you and take care.
Thanks.